I only learned about all this because years ago, an antique clock restorer contacted me and asked me to help him solve a murder.
S-Town is the biggest blockbuster podcast in history, and it's set in our backyard in Alabama. The show hit a record 10 million downloads just 4 days after its release, and now it's hit 40 million.
40 million. And in Bibb County, where the show is set, there's a lot of talk about what the show got right and what it got wrong. CBS 42 News reporter Brittany Bivens went to investigate and show you the people and the places you hear about in the podcast but have never seen before. Brittany?
Yeah, that's right, Jim. S-Town introduces the world to the small Bibb County town of Woodstock. It's the town in the story where that S stands for something we cannot say on TV, but it sums up how the main character, John B. McLemore, feels. I went to Woodstock to meet people who knew John B., people whose lives were opened up for the world to hear.
I only learned about all this because years ago, an antique clock restorer contacted me and asked me to help him solve a murder.
This is S-Town.
You kind of think that you hate to be labeled that forever.
Because the truth is more complicated than the label.
I had no idea what it would become, and I don't think anybody else did either.
This is Tyler Goodson, a familiar voice to fans of the podcast.
I'm roughneck, country as a butterbean, but I just work and try to take care of my kids.
I talked to Tyler at his lawyer's office in Bessemer. He can't discuss details of the court case you may have heard about on the show, but he did talk about his friend, John B. McLemore.
It's been emotional. It has been since he died, but since the podcast has come out, it's been really sad.
And asked me to help him solve a murder.
These are pictures of the hedge maze Tyler helped John build. It's a world another friend of John's, Cheryl Dodson, just went to see. She's also dealing with the fallout of S-Town.
You know, people at work go, oh, what would I have to pay Joe Mammy for pudding?
Yes, the pudding from the podcast. And when I went to see Cheryl and her husband, the town's mayor, Jeff Dodson, they shared all these food staples, now made famous.
So the kids' graduation, Miss Leader's going to send a cake over. You know, that's the way it works.
Cheryl says it's a tight-knit, close community she knows and loves, but she feels you don't always hear that on the show.
I thought that the relationship between John and Kendall looked like there was a animosity that really didn't exist.
Kendall Burt of the Burt family featured on the podcast.
I thought Kendall got a bad rap, and one thing that I thought listeners might want to know, there was always this discussion of people to be notified of his death, and John had listed Kendall as one of those people, and it also specified that Kendall be notified in person.
John B. McLemore died 2 years ago. Since the podcast, his grave has become a destination for fans.
Used to visit the graveyard every now and then, but I don't really want to no more. People crawling out the woods.
Some of his friends question whether John B. would want his most personal secrets available for global download.
You know, you have to think he wouldn't have. You know, I mean, who would have? I mean, it was pretty. Some of it was pretty damp. You know, it was pretty personal.
Others are determined to give this story a positive ending.
This is Southern gossip at its worst and its best.
Cheryl Dodson keeps a few of John B.'s belongings. The clock that brought them together, his height marked on her door.
We measured John.
His favorite wildflowers in his old jars. A new blog where she says she wants to share more stories of her town, a town made famous by a man and a podcast.
It was actually a motto off one of the sundials. It said, tedious and brief. And that's what life is, it's tedious and brief. I said about this podcast, I said, you know, if we take anything away from it, maybe it shows us how we could be a little bit more compassionate and understanding of others. Maybe we can take that away from it.
Woodstock leaders have told me they've seen visitors from all over the world who want to see S-Town for themselves. We have more photos of the places and characters from the podcast and other web exclusives over at WIET.com. Live in the studio, Brittany Bivens, CBS 42 News, local coverage you can count on.